All right, so the big questions that we raised this evening: what does Trump 2.0 mean for the world? And importantly, what does Trump 2.0 mean for India? Do America's allies need to watch out, and will Trump give Russia a long rope? How will China tackle Trump? Trump seemingly kind on China, at least till now. Should the world brace for uncertain times? Let's take all these questions to our panelists this evening. I have with us Dhruva Jaishankar, Director, ORF America, Jayant Krishna, Senior Fellow, CSIS, Andrew K.P. Lung, China strategist and analyst, K.C. Singh, former Secretary MEA, Irfan Nuruddin, Professor, Georgetown University, and my colleague Geeta Mohan, Foreign Affairs Editor, who's in the studio with me. Geeta, let's begin with you. Before we go macro, let's go micro. What does Trump 2.0 mean for India and the slew of executive orders that he signed? What have been the most noteworthy that India needs to be concerned about?
Well, in terms of challenges, I suppose some of the very important ones that India would be looking at, while there isn't an order specifically so, but yeah, trade and tariffs are going to be of an area of concern and challenge for India, although Trump and Modi got along very well in Trump's first term. But there were challenges back then as well, Preeti, that had to do with trade and tariff. And the most important one would be about deportations and citizenship, visa policies for sure. But we're looking at about 750,000 illegal Indian immigrants there. And if they're identified, it's the third largest number of people from a particular country, apart from Mexico and El Salvador. So that certainly is going to be of grave concern to India, because it will have political impact domestically should they be returned.
And at least with what we're looking at, the deportations will begin as soon as possible.
As soon as the systems are in place, the government and the machinery is in place.
And
yes.
The figure that we have is about 7.5 lakh unaccounted in terms of, Indian Americans.
Yes.
Which are in the United States of America. All right, Geeta, allow me to bring in our guest right now. Let's cut across immediately to Dhruva Jaishankar, Director, ORF America. We have him for a very short time. Welcome, Mr. Jaishankar. But first question, we saw U.S. President Donald Trump deliver his inaugural address. What to you was most noteworthy? How much of it do you reckon is bluster? How much do you think he's very serious about?
I think there are two categories of policy issues. One are areas where he has been very consistent, both during his campaign, during his first term, in fact, in some cases even before. So it's quite clear where he stands on undocumented migration, where he stands on energy, where he stands on tariffs and the trade deficit, and he's taking some measures to we've seen that in the first few hours. Now he's taken some measures to address those. On some other issues, obviously there are internal debates and deliberations that are underway. In some cases, different factions, different sets of advisors have different views on this, and so I think it still remains to be seen where he will come out on China, where he will come out on Russia, where he will come out on some of the specifics related to the economy and supply chains, and on legal migration. So I think these are some areas where he hasn't taken immediate decisive steps, but in other areas he has. So I think that was quite clear, and he mentioned many of the same themes in his inaugural speech. I would say the one idea that I would highlight from his inaugural address is he says he wants to keep his legacy as that one of someone who is a peacemaker and someone who finds solutions to international problems. That was what was implied. Now, how he goes about that remains to be seen. The one example he gave was Israel and Palestine and the release of hostages by Hamas. But whether that applies in other areas such as Ukraine, such as in the Indo-Pacific, again, remains to be seen. But it's interesting that he's thinking already, it appears, of the second term as one of his legacy, rather than his first term, which was obviously he was up for re-election at that time.
Mr. Jaishankar, my colleague Geeta has a question for you. Go ahead, Geeta.
Right. Dhruva, the fact that there are mixed signals over here, we did not see Donald Trump really hit very hard at China. There was hardly any mention apart from the fact that he spoke about ownership of the Panama Canal. But there's a Quad ministerial happening in a few hours from now. The foreign ministers of Quad countries are going to meet: India, Japan, Australia, and now the recently confirmed US Secretary of State. So what's that messaging over here? Indo-Pacific, Quad being a focal point, yet he's engaging China, speaking to Xi Jinping ahead of his inauguration.
No, this exactly, and this speaks to what I said. I think China policy is still a little bit uncertain. On the one hand, Trump, invited Xi Jinping to his inauguration. The vice president, who's the seventh ranking member of the Politburo Standing Committee in Beijing, attended, and he's also stayed in some ways an order on TikTok. We'll see again about the implementation of that. So on the one hand, you have these seemingly more conciliatory gestures directed towards Beijing. On the other hand, he mentioned very specifically in the context of the Panama Canal on trade and tariffs. He also very specifically talked about China. And then there's been the Quad meeting as well. So again, I think we're seeing these twin tracks, and some of it is reflective again of different views of his advisors. Largely, the national security team, both at the White House and at the State Department, tends to be more China skeptical, whereas others, including donors, people in the business community, want to see more of an accommodation or more cooperation with China. So I think that is one area we'll see in the next few weeks and months. I would just harken back to 2017, where very early on in his first tenure, President Trump met with Xi Jinping in Mar-a-Lago at his home in Florida. It seemed that meeting initially seemed to have gone well, and yet over the subsequent months, he felt betrayed. He felt that China had not lived up to its end of the bargain, and within a few months, we started seeing him adopting a much more confrontational approach to China.
Well, there is word that he did speak to President Xi Jinping right before his inaugural. But, one quick question, Mr. Jaishankar, before we let you go. There are a lot of Indians who'd be watching the developments very, very closely because, number one, he's vowed to try and end birthright citizenship in the country. Of course, that is debatable where the 14th Amendment comes into question. But when it comes down to unaccounted Indians, how badly do you think India would be hit on that account?
Again, it remains to be seen because I think there are many different categories. It's not a monolith. There are many people who are in a bit of a limbo. They have, one of their visa status has expired. They have applied for a new status and they're waiting for clearance, such as for a green card or something like that. So there's a big category of those people. There are those who have come in through other means, visa overstays. So I'm not sure there's one category. I think there's some concern both in India and the US about these trafficking groups, and both the US and India want to crack down upon that. So again, I think on some issues they may be able to find some kind of mutually acceptable accommodation. The bigger, longer-term challenge, of course, will be a legal migration regime,
right,
and what that means. Again, you have conflicting views. There's some who want global talent as part of U.S. competitiveness. There are others who are prioritizing cultural factors and would like to see lower migration from many countries.
But Mr. Jaishankar, there's been a fair amount of talk over the H-1B visa. Indians are the majority H-1B visa holders in the country, and if I'm not wrong, if you look at the fiscal year 2023, 72% of the total H-1B approvals were Indians. How do you think this is going to figure in Trump 2.0?
No, so this is an issue. It is not only a Republican issue. In fact, Democrats have raised concerns about H-1B as well. This is a program that has been around for many years and has, in some ways, utility has changed over time. It has not always been the same. So I think there is a view that something needs to change. The question is in what direction. A lot of it will also require legislative changes as well in the U.S. Congress. And although the Republicans do have a majority in both houses, in the House of Representatives, particularly, it's a very slim majority. So whether they can actually have some consensus on immigration reform, which has been a very thorny issue because people want to package many other questions of illegal migration as well within a sort of more comprehensive immigration reform. So it's very hard hard to see, not impossible, very hard to see that kind of comprehensive immigration reform taking place in Congress.
Mr. Jaishankar, we know you need to go, but Geeta, do you have a quick question before we let him go?
Just a very quick question, Dhruva. What do you think the early on engagement of the Quad leaders means for India? And in terms of concerns, what is it that you think the External Affairs Minister is going to raise?
No, so one is, I think it's a good sign. I mean, even the Biden administration, India was, after some of the closest allies, India was one of the first calls that Biden made as president. And, in fact, again, the new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, his first bilateral engagement will be with India after the Quad meeting. So that is an encouraging sign that they want to get off to a good start in this early engagement. That doesn't mean there won't be challenges. I think, again, I would anticipate some very hard negotiations in the coming few months, weeks and months on immigration issues, on the trade deficit and on tariffs, amongst other areas. But again, broadly, a more cooperative partnership in many other areas, supply chain security, maritime security, a whole number of other areas where they have some mutual interests. So again, broadly positive that this is such an early engagement at a high level. But that doesn't mean that there won't be some very difficult negotiations.
All right, Dhruva Jaishankar, appreciate you joining us. Thank you there. Appreciate the patience of our other guests. Let's cut across to our other guests right now. I have Jayant Krishna, Senior Fellow, CSIS. And, Mr. Krishna, if you look at it, a slew of executive orders on day one, right from immigration, energy, gender, diversity, pardons, tariffs, climates. What is the message that you think that President Donald Trump in his second term is trying to send? Is it also somewhere down the line an indication of a new era where it comes down to U.S. administration?
So one thing is very clear, he means business. He's wasting no time. A lot of announcements happened as a part of his inaugural speech itself yesterday. And now, through a slew of executive orders, I think he means business, that's for sure. But, what intrigues me the most is what he said that, instead of taxing U.S. citizens to enrich other countries, he would tariff and tax other countries to enrich U.S. nationals, So this is so my concern is, in a day and age when global leaders need to behave more multilaterally, I think his entire focus on America first and a unilateral kind of a behavior is something which we need to be concerned about. And especially if you look at India, I think our trade relations are very important. U.S. is the biggest trade partner for India. And for the U.S., India is the 7th largest trade partner. And among major countries, U.S. is the only country where there is a trade surplus. India has a trade surplus in its favor, which means India exports more to the U.S. than what it imports from the U.S. So any fiddling with the tariff could be disastrous. Even in his last term, he had fiddled with a few categories, tariff in a few categories like iron and steel and some other products where our concerns. India did suffer. So I think that is what remains to be seen. And of course, as Jaishankar also mentioned, I think visa issue is again, a bit, I think India has reasons to worry because earlier in his campaign, he said he'll scrap H-1B visa altogether. Of course, later, in last few days after he was successful in the elections, he won the elections. He did mention it's not all that bad. And it's for India has to start negotiating very effectively. Let's understand one thing very clear. In today's day and age, countries do not necessarily get what they deserve. They get what they negotiate. So I think that's very important. US doesn't do any favor to India by, giving, large number of H-1B visas, As a matter of fact, Indians, the doctors, the space scientists, the IT, software experts, other scientists, they go there and they meet the skills deficit that US suffers from. And the people from India largely, they make their economy globally competitive, their businesses, their industry globally competitive. I think that messaging has to happen right from day one. The External Affairs Minister who went there, I think some of the meetings would happen, but serious meetings would happen only later after a few weeks or a month or so, the bilaterals that happen. India has to, set its expectations very, very clearly. He's talked about 60% tariff barrier for China. Later he said it should be 10% plus the existing levels. Today, we heard about Canada and Mexico being at 25% tariff level. So I think India has not touched so far, but I think it's very, very important, it being the largest trade partner for
we're going to circle
us.
back, Geeta, right to where Indian concerns are, but just, getting in our other guests. We have Andrew K.P. Luing from China, strategist and analyst. You've been looking at where vis-a-vis the relationship with the United States of America and China. Geeta, you put that in perspective because he seemingly was quite kind if you look at it where China is, was concerned. But how is China looking at it, Andrew? Because right now, it comes at the back of President Trump criticizing the role of Putin, practically saying that, Putin is ruining where Russia is concerned. There's been a conversation between Xi Jinping and, Vladimir Putin as well. How do you all put it together? How are you viewing Donald Trump in his second term?
Of course, the two leaders have met before and spoken to each other a number of times. And this time around, China is much more prepared compared with President Trump's first term. Prepared not only in the sense of doing some immediate preparations, but over the past 4 years during the Biden administration, China has already prepared itself for these kind of traumatic changes with a possible Trump term in terms of growing its own technological self-reliance and also building relationships with the Global South. In other words, extending China's international and multilateral links, particularly also through the Belt and Road Initiative, through Central Asia and Latin America and all over the world. But I think that the realization is that this Trump term is very, very different. There is no doubt that Trump is pulling out from any kind of international institutions, and everything must be American first. Gone are the days when we saw we cherish the American magnanimity, generosity, and also broad-mindedness. That's all gone. There's all now focus on Americans' self-interest. Now that, of course, opens up opportunity for China to play a balancer by upholding the international institutions, by doing more for climate change, for example, whereas Trump is now focusing on fossil fuels, and China is now the world's largest renewable energy supplier. So I think that China is now looking at it both ways. On the one hand, prepare for kind of traumatic kind of tariffs, but on the other hand, growing its connections.
But China, somewhere down the line, has also made it very clear that they're disappointed that the US is withdrawing from the WHO and the Paris Climate Accord.
Well, as I said, I mean, it doesn't mean that Trump is going to be kind to China. Of course, it's going to exact the last ounce of worth from this relationship. And he already threatened to impose something like 60% tariffs, even though now this is not yet introduced because he's now reviewing the kind of trade relations with China and the rest of the world before deciding what to do. And particularly, I think that there's every chance that he's going to visit China and meet President Xi first before deciding what to do. But of course, both sides are quite realistic about this relationship.
All right. How should India view this relationship in where you have President Trump in his second term, K.C. Singh? Because let's hark back to his first term. They were clearly, it was marked by deepening India-US ties. You had the, the Howdy Modi rally in Houston. Then you had Namaste Trump in 2020, right a year after that in Ahmedabad. How is India looking at this? Do you think there's going to be a change in terms of diplomacy, the relationship, or do you think we're going to go towards exactly what it was the last time around?
Well, as I said, I mean, it doesn't mean that Trump is going to be kind of 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 kind
Look, the difference from last time is that he had senior advisors, seasoned people around him. He was unhappy with many of them. He changed them. But for instance, General Miley, whose picture has just been taken off the wall at Pentagon, he refused to Trump's request to use the army domestically. He said, no, that will be against. And he also gave a lecture to the troops saying that our commitment is to the Constitution. It is not to the president. So now all that is gone. So he's chosen people, and we've seen that's why some of his nominees are running into a problem. Tulsi Gabbard is facing the Senate today. We've seen the problem that some of the others have faced because he has chosen people purely on a basis of loyalty, that they will do exactly what he wants. So he's not looking for advice. He is looking really for what he thinks is his vision. He's got a commitment that he's given to the people, and he started moving on it very rapidly. And now there are contradictions in that. You take West Asia, you take the Gaza peace accord or ceasefire. His representative played a role in it. They did did go and tell Netanyahu that Trump wants this out of the way before he comes in. Mm-hmm. And now what he's done on the very first day is he's removed the sanctions against the extreme far right, a number of far right individuals in Israel, and a number of settler groups. So today, as we speak, West Bank is burning. The settlers are going into villages of Palestinians. They're trying to occupy more territory. Now, this is Trump for you. So he'll arrange a ceasefire on one side and then unleash something on the other. Also on the ceasefire, when he was asked, he took credit for it and then said, hope this war will end. He said, I don't know. This is not our war. Now, there is this contradiction in Trump. There is an element where he'll take credit for something, and there's an element where he'll let it go. So essentially, that thing will carry on. So what does any country want? What does India want? For the last 20 years, we've stabilized relations with US. Every US president, every Indian government has moved it on one premise, that India was critical to US approach to the rest of the world, especially to balancing China. Trade, commerce, etc. was important. Mm-hmm. So India was a growing power, and that is the stability that India was looking for. Peace in West Asia, balancing of China through Quad and other measures, as well as trade, technology transfers to India. How much of that can you count on with Trump? You don't know, because there is this kind of contradictions in his behavior.
All right. I want to bring in Geeta back into this conversation, because Geeta, taking off from what Mr. K.C. Singh said, in his first round, and especially where India's relationship with Trump in his first going as, the president of America, there was a mutual commitment to stronger ties. Most of it came from a strategic alliance to counter China's influence in this region. That seems to be also turning, because India is also second guessing what will be America's stand where China is concerned.
Yeah, absolutely, Preeti. Like we said, there are mixed signals when it comes to China. What Trump is going to do vis-a-vis China is something we'll have to wait and see. But yes, look at the decisions and the announcements. One of the biggest announcements that you were talking about one of the biggest announcements was him threatening BRICS. Mm-hmm. Now, BRICS is a forum that has Russia, India, China, apart from the 7 other countries, but Russia, India, China are critical to BRICS, and in that, the messaging that you're de-dollarizing, if you start using your own currency, you will have hell to pay. There are consequences. That's a direct threat, and that's a question we'd like to pose to K.C. Singh, maybe, as to how will India navigate this space of a direct threat to BRICS by Trump?
Well, that's only one part. For instance, I think the most threatening was when he said, he sent a message to Xi saying, the two of us can solve all the world's problems. Now, that was the ultimate Indian dread, that you don't want a new bipolarity between US and China, because then you don't figure in that. Then it's not a multipolar world. It's a new kind of bipolarity. So similarly with Trump, we'll have to be prepared. On many things, he will walk along with you. In many things, he may confront you, as that we haven't come to tariffs and trade, because our trade with the US is imbalanced. And in Trump's limited understanding of trade, anything where there is imbalance, he will try balancing it. He doesn't realize that if he raises the tariffs, the American consumer is hit. There's no way that money goes to the American consumer. The American consumer pays more. But he has a very elementary sense of economy. But some things will happen. If US increases the production of oil and gas and starts exporting more, the global price of oil may come down. He may hurt Russia thus. But India is quite happy if the global price of oil comes down. So Trump comes as a very mixed bag. And I think we have to have a new kind of diplomacy where you be prepared on every front to utilize the opportunities and contain the damage.
You know, I want to bring in at the back of the conversation that Geeta and K.C. Singh was having, Irfan Nuruddin into this. Irfan Nuruddin, a lot of how India deals with Trump, you know, how far away are we from the kind of bonhomie we shared with him in his first term, will depend on how Donald Trump tackles China. Do the allies of America need to be a tad bit wary? Do they need to watch out?
Oh, completely, right? I mean, Trump doesn't care for allies. I mean, Ambassador Singh is so diplomatic. I don't have to be diplomatic. Mr. Trump is a narcissist, xenophobe. He doesn't like foreigners. He's a racist, in my opinion, and his voting base that he takes more seriously share that. I mean, so really, you asked earlier, what kind of America is he building? He's building an America for white men and for white people more generally, and everyone else is incidental. So I think what we make the mistake of is trying to impute rationality and a grand strategy to somebody who basically doesn't think in those terms. He thinks about what's good for him. So Mr. Trump is looking for victories. He's looking for anything that makes him look good and everything else. There are no moral principles guiding the foreign policy of Trump 1.0, and there are definitely not going to be any moral principles guiding Trump 2.0. There is no grand strategy here. This is all about Mr. Trump. So where China is concerned, Trump knows that picking a fight with a country that is growing rapidly and where he might lose is not in his interest. Striking deals with them, the TikTok extension is already one indicator of that, but striking deals with them that he gets to portray as being victories is really what's at stake over here. So his allies are completely expendable. I think across Europe, after November 5th, there was a moment of dread. There's a real sense that, okay, everything has to change. Lots of what NATO has done is building itself to be resilient against possible American pullout. The climate accords that have been negotiated carefully and for which India is a major beneficiary, right? The global south is the single biggest victim of climate change. We require the advanced industrial countries, the global north, to take on their responsibility for the emissions that they have issued over the last 200 years. Trump just pulled out of that accord. That is not good for anybody in the world, but it's definitely not good for the poorer countries and poorer people of the world. Pulling out of the World Health Organization hurts only poor countries. It doesn't maybe hurt the United States, except in a broad sense. So across the board, this ripping up, what you call the great disruptor of global multilateralism, is American isolationism, but it's more importantly, it's about Trump aggrandizement. It's about making him sound like he's the one breaking free. So on your Chiron, you mentioned that today is Liberation Day. What exactly is he liberating America from? And that kind of rhetoric in which he poses as the savior for Americans against some beleaguered invasion force means that no one else other than he can be the savior. Allies don't play a role in that regard. And in fact, allies that stand up and advocate on their behalf, including countries like India, are going to find themselves in short shrift. He requires people to bend their knee, kiss the ring, follow along with him. Smart countries, as Ambassador Singh also indicated, and as the other guests have indicated, will find ways to work with Trump, allow him to take credit while getting what they want. He's very susceptible to flattery, and that can be pulled off. But if you're trying to negotiate as equals, which a country of India's economic, political, and historical stature should have every right to do, that is not what Trump is going to be very attracted to, and neither is he going to be attracted to his allies. So sorry to be quite candid over here, but I mean, I think it's important for us not to whitewash what's about to happen. What we're going to see is a very domestically focused retribution agenda, a very racist agenda of anti-immigration rhetoric that is rampant. Indian and Indian Americans are going to be caught up in that. I think the H-1B visa issue is one that is going to just work out badly for India in the short and medium run. There is no win-win for Trump in that regard. We can try and do some backdoor work on that, but the world that we that I came to America in as a student and stayed on in as an H-1B visa holder before getting a green card and then U.S. citizenship, that door is closed, possibly forever, but definitely over the next 4 years.
Geeta, as we circle back to Mr. Krishna, from what Mr. Nuruddin was saying, that certain amount of narcissism that he speaks of did somewhere down the line reflect in renaming the Gulf of Mexico as the Gulf of America or the Panama Canal or, Greenland, name it. But there have been, certain executive decisions that could be troubling and disconcerting to many. One of them, of course, which Mr. Nuruddin spoke of is, pulling out of the WHO, the Paris Accord. Also, when it comes down to gender diversity, putting an end to all the DEI programs of Joe Biden, recognizing only 2 genders which were assigned at birth would be disconcerting to many.
Disconcerting, it is going to really disturb and really create chaos within countries. So, now we're, instead of broad basing, we're going right into America and seeing, Preeti, what these decisions could mean for America. There are already protests that are taking place out there. The corporate sector is feeling the heat, and many of them had reduced their compliances on DEI, which has to do with diversity, equality, and inclusion, which were important aspects to ensure that there is no discrimination, so to say. And to do away with that would mean a whole lot of problems for maybe those in the corporate sector who would now not be able to go and challenge decisions that are taken. Many say that, the DEI policies were being taken advantage of, but over here that's not the case. The more important part is the LGBTQI++ community that is affected by this specific policy of Donald Trump, where he very specifically has created 2 binaries, a male gender and a female gender, de-recognizing transgender community. That certainly is going to be disturbing. It is going to, we've already seen a lot of people, Preeti, who are saying they're going to leave once the election results were announced, who are going to leave America. There are problems that Elon Musk has had with his own child. And in his own government and establishment, I suppose there'd be one man who'd be really smiling at that decision, and that would be Elon Musk. True. So a lot of problems for domestic.
And there's going to be a fair amount of domestic backlash to that as well.
There already is.
There already is, and we must understand that. Let's circle back, Geeta, and bring in Jayant Krishna back into this conversation, because, while we are talking about issues that could be deeply troubling, Mr. Krishna, on the other front, pulling out of the WHO, clearly somewhere down the line, this also marks a dramatic shift in the US global health policy.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reasons he has given for pullout from WHO are twofold. I mean, one, he says that the US pays disproportionately higher amount to WHO vis-a-vis China. And secondly, he's blaming them for whatever wrong happened, for COVID, during the pandemic, I think it's very unfortunate. I think, a lot of, not that the UN bodies, including WHO, doesn't need any reforms. It does need a lot of reforms, but it doesn't mean that you pull out and stop funding it. I think that's not correct. And the other thing, what he's done is in a day and age where there's so much of concern about global warming, about the climate changes, pulling out of the Paris Accord is again taking the world back by several years. And I think Paris Accord was one, where on climate issues, it was very, very, very balanced, about the responsibilities of the global north versus, the benefits accruing to the global south. I think that's very unfortunate that he has pulled out. What he did in his last term also, it's very unfortunate. I would think yesterday when he started, I had a ray of hope when he said that I would like my legacy to be known as a apostle or a messenger of peace, and he talked about Martin Luther King's dream to become a reality and so on and so forth. But I think today's executive orders, though largely on predictable lines, it definitely didn't, do any good to his
Right.
the imagery that he was trying to project for himself as how he would like to be remembered as after his 4-year term.
He's always been, Geeta, very critical of the UN health aid. You want to make a point?
Can I just add the underlying factor over here for everything that Trump has said has been this, that America has been taken advantage of, and they will no longer be taken advantage of. And that's the reason why you see him pull out of WHO, paying more. Paris Agreement, where he thinks developing countries will take advantage and the developed, which is US, will suffer at the cost of developing countries developing. And NATO, We're not discussing it, but that will be a part of the conversation very soon. NATO, he is going to pull out all the aid that goes into Ukraine. So there will be concessions that would have to be made. Russia will keep some territory. Ukraine will have to give in to negotiate peace.
Mr. Lung, do you think, he is playing to the domestic audience, to his domestic gallery, keeping in mind the kind of mandate that he got? But will, with what we're discussing, pulling out of WHO, NATO, isolate Washington when it comes down to, on an international sphere, which could be advantageous to China?
Sorry, are you asking me?
Yes, sir. Yes, you, sir.
Oh, I see. Okay, well, I think that as far as China is concerned, the main area of friction is trade. There is no way that all the jobs are coming back to the United States, tariffs regardless, because the huge cost differential of producing the same product, and of course, let's face it, the American production machinery has been hollowed out after decades of offshoring in favor of the capital markets. But I think that there is a possibility that Elon Musk could well be a peacemaker, a bridge between the relations in the relations between the United States and China. Now, if you look at China's operations, there are operations in Africa, for example. They're owned by China. But they also produce jobs in those host countries. When I visited London last year, and I look at the black cabs, and I noticed the electric black cabs, they are marked LEV, London Electric Vehicles. C stands for commentary. I mean, these black cabs are now making commentary, but then the company is owned by China. So I think that this it's possible that now we're seeing a graduation, as it were, from made in China to other countries' brand names to created in China. Now we're seeing a graduation to owned by China, bringing jobs and opportunities to the host countries. And now, of course, Elon Musk is very well placed to do so because he's got huge investment at Tesla in China, and of course he's got years and of Donald Trump, and of course he's himself is a big deal maker as well. So I think that there are disruptions, but there are opportunities if you look at it carefully.
All right, okay. We're closing in this debate. KC Singh, I want to get you back into this conversation. Keeping in mind that in his first term, India had a great relationship with him, I think by the end of this discussion and what we've seen of the recent past, we need to be a tad bit wary and see how he functions and then maybe take a call on diplomacy. Technically speaking, KC Singh, are we now, not just India, but the world, looking at fairly uncertain times?
Absolutely. Zelensky was speaking at the Davos summit today, and he told the European leaders, America is not interested in us, and let's stop waiting for America. So we have to have self-help. I think Europeans are already going down that path. And more dangerous than that is that Trump seems to have no respect for a rule of law internationally. If he's going to forcibly occupy Greenland or Panama, how is he going to stop China from occupying Taiwan or for Russia from occupying Ukraine? There are huge conflicts in these positions. And I think he doesn't understand it. Whatever occurs to him, he just says that. He's talking about McKinley, who was the president at the turn of the last century, who occupied Puerto Rico and a few other places. Now, he can't be McKinley. This is not the colonial times. So I think Trump he's got multiple things in his head. They are not coordinated into a grand policy or a grand strategy. What Biden had done over the last 4 years, despite the distraction of the COVID epidemic, which Trump left him, he managed to handle that. And then he was distracted by Gaza and by Ukraine. But he still strengthened America's links with its allies. It knew you cannot balance China by yourself. You have to have. Now you take a simple thing like if America take the UN. A UN budget now, the Chinese are giving as much to UN as the US did. WHO, Americans are just giving $1.5 billion. That's peanuts for China. Even India can give that. Chinese are giving $500 million. They'll up it. They'll go up to $2 billion. So which means you're vacating space multilaterally, which will be taken up by China. And India should also be thinking like that, that here the Indian and the Chinese interests coincide. We want a rule of law globally. We want open trade, and we want multilateralism. So where that is concerned, the Chinese also must realize that India is a partner. Maybe they're beginning to realize it, and that's why they've done the last bit of border settlement in Ladakh, which had been, pending for the last 2-3 years. They realize that by themselves they can't, and that there is uncertainty which Trump will bring into the world, and the Chinese may be well preparing for it, and so should we.
I'm going to bring in Irfan Nuruddin for a final comment, but Geeta, do you see now at the back of it a certain international diplomatic realignment?
Absolutely. Not just realignment, a lot of countries would be looking at how they're going to engage America and how they're going to balance the ties with their other allies who Trump might consider America's adversaries. And India is precariously positioned. But precariously positioned really there where it has American adversaries as its allies and partners, and yet you have to engage an ally, friend, partner, America as well.
So. Uncertain times, Irfan Nuruddin, because even though Donald Trump wants to come out as a man of peace, the Gaza ceasefire, he wants the Russia crisis to end, he wants Vladimir Putin to sign a deal saying he's destroying Russia by not doing so. How do you think things are going to pan out?
We're going to see a lot. I mean, the main thing from India's perspective is to remember that there's always with Trump a lot of noise, a lot of bluster. And you have to keep your eyes on the prize. What do we want out of the relationship? What will be beneficial to India, not just in the short run, but in the long run? If we have a grand strategy, Trump is pliable because he likes to think that he's making deals. And if we can give him win-win deals, he signs them. What we can't have is expect for Trump. One of your earlier panelists mentioned Trump's not going to be magnanimous. That's not part of the DNA. There's no grand strategy over there. So I think what we see is a lot of disruption. I think there'll be the pressure on Ukraine will be inordinate because Trump's going to pull all of the military aid. The economic aid has been secured by the Biden administration, but the military aid will dry up. I think he's already signaled, and Ambassador Singh mentioned sort of already what we're seeing in Israel, that the support for Netanyahu and the hard line in Israel will continue over there. He likes strong men and he likes assertions of nationalism. So from India's perspective, I think the real question, of course, as we've all been talking about, is does Trump adopt a different policy where China is concerned? And over there, as I've said on your show before and on, before, I think India has to also take a much broader view than seeing that anything good for China is necessarily bad for India. I think the real issue is that China being a powerful economic engine in the global south is not a bad thing inherently. What has to be managed against is Trump getting bored with India, seeing that investments in India's civil nuclear relationship, for instance, in manufacturing, in the high-end talent and education sectors, continues to be a priority, even if he's trying to build better relationships with China. We don't inherently benefit from an isolated, antagonized China. I think we are much better off with a China that's integrated into multilateral institutions, where India for 75 years has been a significant player. It is in our interest, I firmly believe, to work to fill the space that America will cede under Trump in those global multilateral institutions, because India is more powerful in those institutions than it is outside of them. But yeah, one way or the other, buckle up, pop the popcorn, it's going to be quite a show.
Uncertain times. We're going to end it at that. Professor Nuruddin, Ambassador K.C. Singh, Mr. Krishna and Mr. Lin, thank you for taking the time out and joining us. My colleague Geeta, who's been with me through the course of this discussion.